The NBA playoffs are less than a week away, and not enough people are talking about the matchup between Toronto and Cleveland. On one hand, you have a young Raptors team built on length, athleticism, and defensive chaos. On the other, a Cavs squad that might be going all in on a make-or-break title push. Both teams have their advantages, both have real flaws, so what can we expect to decide the series? In today's video brought to you by PrizePicks, we're going to take a look at the most important factors for each team and figure out who has the upper hand. It sort of goes without saying, but this matchup is going to be all about the duel between Cleveland's offense and Toronto's defense. The duo of Mitchell and Harden has produced a 126 offensive rating in over 400 minutes, which is how they'll start and close games. In between, one is always on the court, and every variation has produced an above-average offense. When you look at the Raptors' personnel, they don't have the best point-of-attack defenders in the world, especially in their main five, so you'd think that an elite backcourt pairing wouldn't have too much trouble getting their game off. It's not that simple though. They're big, lengthy, athletic, they're deep, and they're extremely well coached. So at the team level, they're able to really limit higher level creators with their concepts. Scotty's the Swiss Army knife. They'll deploy him in all sorts of different ways, whether that means guarding the ball, matching up with a big, or roaming behind the play as a free safety. And from there, they'll constantly mix things up with their matchups, the way they bring pressure, how they defend ball screens. Sometimes you'll even see them throw out a zone. The one consistent theme is that they're aggressive with the way they bring help and take away driving or passing lanes, yet they're disciplined enough to not get caught out of position. It's a real connected unit, always communicating and rotating on a string. Which is why, despite lacking elite point of attack defense, they actually had Donovan Mitchell's number this season. In 2 games against the Raptors, he averaged 24 points, but that came while shooting 34% from the field and 24% from 3 on extreme volume with 4.5 turnovers. So instead of a 120 offensive rating, the Cavs got held to a measly 104. Again, not because of any one defender locking up Mitchell, but because of the way they completely took away his driving lanes. In most cases, Mitchell wants to attack opposing bigs, but because Scotty's able to roam off of Mobley behind the play, they're comfortable sending Pirtle up to the level of the screen in a higher drop to take away that space. Same thing with Mamukelashvili off the bench. All he's worried about is not letting Mitchell turn the corner and get downhill, which he's able to do because Scotty's in position to rotate. Then when they try to get Scotty away from the baseline by having Mobley screen, Pirtle's going to be the one coming over to play the role, neutralizing the advantage. And it's the same thing against isolations. All they're worried about is packing the paint to keep him away from the basket, so they'll get really aggressive. Pirtle patrols the restricted area as a last line of defense, while the 2 closest help defenders sink to the middle of the floor to completely wall off the paint. And because Mitchell has no space to get where he wants to go, they're not actually worried about who's guarding the ball. Even after a blow-by, he's running into multiple defenders. That helps them limit Cleveland's guard-to-guard screening action. They can just switch and let Mitchell handpick his matchups, knowing they'll be able to limit his downhill attack. The idea here is to test him as a decision maker. The only available passes that'll get them in rotation are really tough ones over the top of the defense. And in these spots, he tends to get really jump shot happy. I think they'll implement this exact same strategy against Harden. He's obviously a much better passer, so the help can't come too aggressive, or he'll find those little windows to take advantage of. But on the flip side, he also isn't nearly as explosive as Mitchell at this point, so he poses less of an interior scoring threat. By switching, you take away his ability to turn the corner with a numbers advantage and force him to play more one-on-one. Then by plugging his driving gaps, you can keep him from getting deep paint touches, which limits layups, free throws, and allows them to avoid complete defensive breakdowns. Of course, the risk with letting either Mitchell or Harden get the switches they want is that they're both elite shot makers who create a ton of space on the perimeter. They both have the ability to get scorching hot on isolation threes, and when that happens, you'll just see them completely take over games, then put them out of reach. But relying on pull-up jumpers can be extremely volatile. While they could get hot, they could just as easily go cold. And in those situations, the Cavs are going to be forced to push some other buttons. That can mean a few different things. The Cavs have some great movement shooters who can help diversify the offense. But with timely switching, the Raptors should be able to negate those advantages for the most part. Evan Mobley's developed into a guy who can really attack mismatches, so getting him a switch onto a smaller player could lead to some good offense. However, what I didn't mention is that the Raptors actually aren't going to switch any screens involving Barnes. They're treating him like a big in these actions, dropping back against the pick and roll to keep the Mobley matchup. This is where having a versatile defender like Barnes becomes a playoff superpower, because even in situations where Mobley runs an inverted pick and roll or curls off a screen himself, I just think Toronto can for the most part play these actions straight up and live with the results. When I think about the best pathway for the Cavs to attack this Raptors defense, it all comes back to lineups. The reason they're able to come with so much aggressive help and essentially wall off the paint is because Cleveland's often playing lineups with multiple non-shooters, especially when they've got both Allen and Mobley on the court. When needed though, they have this back pocket option of just absolutely stacking the floor with the best collection of shooters you've ever seen. Over the last 3 seasons, Jalen Tyson, Sam Merrill, and Keon Ellis have all hit more than 40% of their catch and shoot threes on serious volume, while Max Strus is one of the league's most dynamic off-ball shooting threats. Any collection of those guys, along with Mitchell, Harden, and a big, is going to have unlimited space. And they've shown throughout this season that they're more than comfortable getting 4 of these guys on the court at the same time and just rolling out a smaller lineup with someone like Jalen Tyson at the 4. With that many elite shooters on the court, not only is it tougher to bring help, matchups get really weird. As long as Pirtle's on the court, Barnes likely wouldn't be able to match up with a big anymore, so they'd be able to keep him away from the basket. That means Mobley would then have an easier time handling the ball or getting switches that he wants, forcing the Raptors to go away from their game plan. In these 4-out, 1-in lineups, Pirtle loses a ton of his defensive utility, and so do their wings. With space to operate, I don't think they'd be able to contain Harden or Mitchell on drives, which is when everything would start to open up for their offense, leading to those 120 type offensive ratings. There's just one problem though, the other side of the basketball. Before we get into that though, I want to thank PrizePicks for sponsoring today's video. If you know you can play responsibly and you have the means to do so, PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy app. So if you're looking for a place to get in on the NBA playoff action, use code HMA and get started. Day 1 of the play-in more than delivered, and we've got more today, starting with the Magic and the Sixers. Orlando's a defense that likes to make ball handlers play one-on-one while staying home on shooters. Along with what he'll get in transition, I like Tyrese Maxey for more than 29.5 points. On the other side, Philly does the exact opposite. I'm expecting them to pack the paint and get the ball out of Paolo's hands, so we're taking him for more than 5.5 assists, a mark he's hit in 4 of his last 5 games. And it's that simple. Find the stat you want, pick more or less, and you've got your lineup. If you sign up for PrizePicks with code HMA and play $5, you get $50 in lineups instantly. So download the app or click the link in the description to get started, and let me hear your picks down in the comments. Earlier I mentioned that the Cavs have a 126 offensive rating during Harden and Mitchell's minutes. They also have a 122 defensive rating, and that's largely the result of some fundamental flaws. Their roster construction is extremely unique. Like Toronto, they don't have many high-level point of attack defenders, but they also don't have big, versatile wings outside of Dean Wade, and they have maybe the least athletic perimeter defense of any team in the league. Their entire defense is reliant on 2 guys, Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen. When you have 2 of the best rim protectors in the league, often playing together, you're able to take away the easiest shot in basketball from most teams. Because regardless of how the offense sets up or tries to get them in space, one will always be in position to roam behind the play. If you can space the floor with high-level shooters along the entire perimeter, you can punish them. But most teams don't have the personnel to do that, so they end up forcing lots of corner threes from weaker shooters. Toronto's a team that could really struggle with this. On the season, they're 25th in the NBA in three-point rate and 22nd in accuracy, while they also lack the shooting depth of the Cavs. Because their franchise player isn't a shooter, it's in their best interest to surround him with as much shooting as possible. Guys like Shed, Murray Boyles, and RJ lose some utility, so I wouldn't be surprised if they start to lean more on Jacoby Walter or Sandro Mamukelashvili to get some of that spacing back. For that reason, among others, I think both could be big X factors in this series. Every lineup change comes with a drawback though. With Walter in place of someone like RJ Barrett, you give up lots of downhill shot creation. With Sandro in place of Pirtle, you give up lots of size, rebounding, and rim protection, so I think it'd be a lot easier for either Mobley or Allen to get their offense going as play finishers or on the offensive glass. In any scenario, I think the Cavs, defensively, are going to be comfortable switching everything, even mismatches. That's what they did in previous matchups, and although the Raptors have a few guys who can win one-on-one, it might not even matter because one of Mobley or Allen will always be waiting for them at the basket. However, remember what I said earlier about the Raptors potentially playing these double big lineups off the court. That could cause some serious problems for Cleveland's defense, because when they have all of their shooters out there, they don't really have a secondary rim protector. Their roster only consists of 3 forwards who actually pose an interior presence: Larry Nance Jr., Naquan Tomlin, and Dean Wade, all of which come with offensive limitations. With that said though, I actually think Wade could end up being a big X factor in this series. He's the only of these 3 who actually gets 3-pointers up with volume, and over the last 3 seasons, he's made about 37% of his catch and shoot threes. For the most part, defenses are comfortable leaving him open, which still hurts the spacing, but if he gets hot, he could produce enough to stay on the court, solving some of their defensive issues during those solo big lineups. As for their other shooters though, Sam Merrill and Keon Ellis are both 6'4", Max Strus is 6'5", and Jalen Tyson, who'd likely play the 4, is 6'6", while none of them offer much resistance at the rim. In those lineups that prioritize spacing, Cleveland's switch-heavy scheme completely falls apart. All the Raptors would have to do is get Mobley switched onto one of their ball handlers or shooters, then put pressure on the basket, which they can do in a number of ways, like posting up Scottie against a mismatch, or having RJ take a slower-footed defender off the dribble. For all of the offensive benefits that come from an undersized frontcourt in this particular matchup, there's an equally as damaging defensive drawback. They lose the ability to switch and would have to let the Raptors create more advantages. They'd be completely outmatched physically, so Toronto could compensate for their lack of shooting by putting more pressure on the paint or on the glass. They could also attack mismatches, because, like I said, their roster is loaded with big, athletic, and skilled wings. That also gives them some lineup flexibility working in their favor. Against smaller front courts, they really like to go with Barnes at the 5, which allows them to go to quicker, more skilled offensive lineups featuring an extra shooter or two, or faster, more switchable and versatile defensive lineups featuring a guy like Colin Murray-Boyles. Which then takes me back to what I said about the defensive viability of a guy like Poeltl against the more spaced out lineups. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Toronto go all in on small ball and try to run shooters off the line with their scrambling ability. There's just one problem the Raptors run into in pretty much every scenario, and that's the math behind Cleveland's offensive advantages. The takeaway I keep coming back to is that this series could really go in one of two directions. If the Cavs go small and get their best shooters on the court to counter aggressive help, then Toronto's also going to be able to get their offense off, resulting in higher scoring games. If the Cavs go double big and get their best defenders on the court to take away the paint from the Raptors' offense, then both offenses probably end up getting stifled, and it really comes down to who can grind it out with tougher shot making. I think we'll see a healthy diet of both throughout the series. In either scenario though, I tend to lean towards Cleveland having the more reliable offense, even if they're more volatile. They clearly have the two best creators on the court, as well as the best shooters and better play finishers, so I just think there's more they can turn to throughout the course of these games. Ingram's mid-range scoring creates a nice floor to fall back on because it's pretty consistently reliable, while Harden and Mitchell tend to be streakier jump shooters, so in that respect, I could see them getting an advantage in certain crunch time situations. And the same goes for either Scottie's mid-post game or RJ slashing in the event that Cleveland's closing with only one big. But I don't think anyone in their rotation can hit the highs that you'll see from the Cavs, and there's just generally less offensive talent on the court at all times. For those reasons, I think the Cavs will be the more efficient half-court offense. I trust in their ability to break down Toronto's defense more than vice versa. However, there's a chance it doesn't actually matter because the Raptors have a couple unique superpowers. That actually starts on offense for them. They're really good at taking care of the ball, which not only helps them consistently get shots up, it prevents opponents from turning defense into easy offense. Also, they're one of the best teams in the league at getting back after missed shots. Instead of crashing the glass, they prioritize limiting runouts, and for those reasons, they're statistically a top 5 transition defense. In the half court on defense, they're incredibly good at turning teams over. Some of that is the aggressive help and great rotations I talked about, but they've also got some high-level defensive playmakers across their entire roster like Jamal Shed, Jacoby Walter, Emmanuel Quickley, and plenty of others who have active hands. Since January 1st, they're forcing 16.5 turnovers every 100 possessions, which is second in the NBA behind only the Pistons. So they're one of those teams that consistently turns defense into offense, getting some easy stuff in the open floor. More importantly though, they make a deliberate effort to get out and run after missed shots. No matter who secures a defensive rebound, they're grabbing and going, pushing the pace. And when you've got a legit offensive engine in transition like Scottie, alongside skilled athletes, that's where they make their money. When doing my research for this video, I actually started to get some flashbacks from last year's playoffs. If you remember, the Pacers went 10 or 11 players deep in some of those games against the Cavs so that they always had fresh legs on the court. Then they just ran them out of the gym. The Raptors have both the talent and depth to do this, and they've done it to teams all season. Along with the way they get back on defense, they completely dominate this part of the game. On the season, they're outscoring opponents in transition by over 8.5 points a game, which is first in the NBA by a pretty considerable margin. The Cavs, on the other hand, are right about average, pretty neutral in transition, and they don't have as deep or as athletic of a rotation. So as a series drags out longer and longer, the Raptors gain more of an advantage. That's without even mentioning what I brought up with their ability to go small. With Scottie or Murray-Boyles at the 5 and a bunch of ball handlers, I'm really not sure how you slow them down. And for that reason, I think the Cavs could end up preferring their double big look just so they can force the Raptors to keep a guy like Poeltl on the court, then turning the game into more of a half-court duel. Because the reality is, if you're able to limit their advantage in transition, you're gonna win the series. So I think that's the battle to watch. The Cavs are great at taking care of the ball, which means they might be able to limit some of those easier runouts. And if they make it a priority to get back in transition, they can even out the margin. You might think these areas pale in comparison to a superior half-court offense, and while that's true in some cases, last year's playoffs told a different story. Out of the 15 matchups, only 2 of them were won by the team that lost the turnover battle, 4 were won by the team that lost the transition battle, and only 1 team pulled out a victory after losing both. So these are the most important areas for the Cavs, in my opinion. Don't turn the ball over. Get back in transition. On offense, they need to find ways to punish help. And individually, Mitchell needs to make good, proactive passing decisions. I think they'll want to keep 2 bigs on the court as much as possible, because keeping them near the basket should completely stifle Toronto's half-court offense. Speaking of which, they're going to have to find ways to unlock both Jacoby Walter and Sandro Mamukelashvili as X-factors, while forcing the Cavs to go away from double big lineups. From there, they'll have to keep Mitchell and Harden out of the paint while defending the 3-point line. Most importantly though, if they can lean into their depth and force turnovers while consistently getting out in transition, they could find themselves in position to win this series. Personally, I find this to be one of the closer first-round matchups. It's definitely one of the most intriguing, because these teams couldn't possibly be more different, which creates endless possibilities. I think we'll see a game where Cleveland's turnovers get out of hand and the Raptors run their way to a win. I think we'll see a game where the Cavs role players get hot, and they shoot themselves into a win. We'll definitely see some games where Harden or Mitchell hit their ceiling, which, depending on the timing, could easily swing the series in their favor. The most likely outcome, in my opinion, is a bunch of close, grinded out games filled with tons of in-game adjustments, trying to figure out this back and forth between efficient offense and defense for both teams in the half court. Like I said earlier, I just trust the Cavs more in those situations. So although I think this is absolutely a winnable series for Toronto, I'm going with Cleveland in a tough 6 games.